And we turn to the statute to start with. The statute makes it fairly clear that any city can do Chapter 380 agreements. We statute cites home rule and general law municipalities, which encompasses every city council in the state is eligible. Also, counties are eligible to adopt Chapter 380 agreement or 381 agreements, which are a separate provision that gives them pretty much the same authority to use these incentive types. Specifically for cities, it's to fund business incentive programs and promote economic development. And cities and counties also can provide grants of money, loans, city personnel, and services. This is where you find the authorization for sales tax rebates. There's a long history going back on this program to prior to creating the Chapter 380 statute, but they were actually referring to a provision that's in the Constitution that allows local entities to do economic development types of things out of their general fund. So I believe it's Chapter 52 of the state constitution. But it went through a lot of wrangling with either the legislature passing bills and Supreme Court decisions that were made that ultimately authorized these for everyone. The first one is one that's close by to most of us in the Austin area. The first one was the city of Bee Cave, and the city of Bee Cave adopted an agreement where they shared 0.5% of their sales tax to use for the developer in return for the developer building the Hill Country Galleria. And in addition, they had they required them to put certain infrastructure in, but kind of unique in theirs was to require them to build a library and a city hall for the city, in addition to providing in addition to providing the economic development impact. And so, in exchange for a 0.5-cent sales tax, the city ended up getting a lot of the infrastructure they otherwise would have been responsible for building. So the purposes of a 380 is to develop a diversification in the economy of the state, eliminate unemployment, underemployment, development, expansion of commerce in the state, and make grants of public money to a corporation. So ultimately, it's a wide open economic development incentive. It doesn't come with a lot of the restrictions that you find under abatements and TERS, but at the same time, it does not put up the rails that a lot of communities would like to see when the cities go into doing economic development incentives. So that's the reason why abatements are still very common, and other types of similar incentives are also common. Chapter 381 programs, this is the ones that are specifically for counties, but a very broad list of expenditure types. Anything that will cause state and economic development, promote and advertise the county, improve the extent to which women and minority businesses are awarded contracts. A lot of buzzwords, but basically a lot of the same things that are mentioned for 380. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the Commissioner's Court to make decisions on what types of incentives they are going to decide to offer. It might be that if you have a county sales tax, you can give a grant equal to the amount of the county sales tax that's collected. That's only if it's a special additional sales tax for like a county assistance district, but out of their general fund, it could be for any type of project. In 2021, the legislature decided that they wanted to know more about what local governments were doing with the funds for Chapter 380 agreements and 381 agreements. So they adopted the HB 2404, which required the controller to create a registry of all of these agreements. Requires all cities, all counties with either new or existing agreements to submit an electronic form to the controller's office and a PDF copy of the agreement within 14 days of adopting the agreement. And there's a $1,000 penalty for failing to meet that deadline, but ultimately the penalty doesn't apply until the controller contacts you. Then you have 14 days thereafter to comply and before we impose the penalty. Do you have a question? Okay, keep moving then. So the what's the value of this registry to you? I know it's a lot of paperwork. Apparently, I have an echo here. Thank you. Okay. So the Chapter 380-381 agreement database, what's the value of it to you? I know it's a lot of extra paperwork for you, but ultimately the main advantage is you can look and see what communities in your adjacent areas are offering incentives for. Very common thing would be looking for what industries that you might benefit from if you were just a few miles away. To show you how this could really be used and you don't need to be really nearby, back when Toyota decided to locate to San Antonio to build basically the Tundra pickup trucks. They built a major manufacturing plant, and major manufacturing plants require a lot of inputs. You're not just building metal cars and putting tires on them. You're also doing things like there's lots of plastic parts that are in the building of a truck. And so the people in Georgetown decided that we're going to try to get one of these subcontractors, and ultimately scored the subcontractor that makes the items in the inside of the cab of the truck, like cup holders and things of that nature. So what we're talking is looking for industries that are locating in your area, what types of industries that's going to be dictated by your workforce, transportation, a lot of other factors. But if it's a workforce issue, if your neighboring community has the workforce, you probably do too. So you can look for the types of companies that seem to have a inherent benefit of coming to your general area of the state.
Hey, Russell, we have a question for you here.
Sure, go right ahead.
And sorry about that echo. I was trying to figure out how best to unmute.
Okay.
Brandon McNerney asks, if a county reports only limited or redacted compliance information, does the comptroller have authority to verify that Chapter 381's agreements are being enforced in good faith? And if it is not the role of the comptroller's office to ensure public access to documentation of compliance when the county does not, then who would do that other than the comptroller?
Well, I can state it this way. Ultimately, the controller's office compliance is limited to the $1,000 penalty. But if you're speaking of an entity not filing or not providing the controller's office a full copy of the agreement, then we would fine them $1,000. We'd notify them of the shortfall and give them the requisite 14 days to comply before we issue a fine. If you're talking about something deeper than that, something that is more an open records issue, because once again, you have to fill out our form and then attach a PDF of the document that you signed with the city, that the county or the city signed with the entity. And if that's not provided, the limit is going to be us on the on the $1,000 penalty. But a violation of open records, if someone asked for a copy of your agreement or everything associated with the contract between the city and the, we'll say Toyota, and you didn't provide it, then you're going to be subject to open records penalties, which include potential jail time. So I guess if your question is, if you're looking for the hard penalty, that's going to be contacting the Attorney General's office and enforcing it as a violation of open records. But just simply not providing all the information in the agreement, notify us, and we will contact the local government and give them good faith time to replace the documents they've had and update any information we had. Hope that answers your question. Local government agreements. When we, let me go back a little bit here. The other thing that happened is the legislature required us in the following session to combine this database with the Chapter 312 abatements. And what this gives you is a single point to go to find all of the economic development agreements that are authorized under state law. You can find copies of the agreements. So ultimately, All of those Chapter 380 and 381 agreements and Chapter 312 agreements can be searched by putting in Dallas. You put in Dallas, it's going to come back with every agreement that the city of Dallas or Dallas County passed. Or if you put in the name of a company like Dell Computer, it will come back with all the agreements in the state that that Dell is a party to. We can give you a couple of things that when you do the search, you may not find is if Dell is is subcontracted to someone else, you may find that the agreement is with the subcontractor. So that does happen from time to time, but we believe it's a fairly robust search engine. So most of the time you're going to be able to find what you're looking for, and you won't have to search more than once on an entity, because you'll come back with all of the Chapter 380, 381 agreements, depending if it's a city or county, and then any abatements that are also in the database pertaining to the same entity or the same company. To show you how big this program is, we haven't done any math on this, because a lot of these agreements they don't have definite dollar amounts on them. So to give you an exact dollar amount for all the agreements, or even on a single agreement, is difficult, because if it's a sales tax sharing agreement, you don't know what the ultimate amount's going to be. It could be that they're going to give half of the sales tax for 10 years. Well, you don't know what that's going to amount to, but we encourage you to put totals in there. So for example, if it's a 10-year agreement, you estimate it's going to be a certain amount, but that doesn't happen very often. But in your agreements, for sure, you're going to want to protect the city or the county by putting in an amount, something like you can have half the sales tax for 10 years up to $5 million. So that way you're not just giving away the farm, with some agreement that doesn't have a limitation on it. But there are a lot of them in the state, more than 4,600 since January of 2022. 368 local governments, which shows you that it's a lot of agreements under a very few local governments. 400 of the agreements utilize sales tax sharing, 300 agreements utilize property tax incentives, and then other types of incentives used including hotel occupancy tax, waiver of fees, waiver of utility fees. I will give you a brief thing that almost happened. It almost happened a couple of times. And this is that there's a couple of members of the legislature that are in very high places that are troubled by the fact of including property tax incentives in 380 agreements. That's what abatements are for. But as the law is written now, you can do any source of the funds that you choose to, as long as it's not restricted for some other purpose. So ultimately, there are 300 agreements that utilize property tax as the incentive. The information we have on our website is really useful to you. This is where you'll find the link to submit your reports, as well as be able to view the reports. We have the municipal agreements and county agreements in the database. To submit, let's go through a quick pass through, because I know we're running low on time in the show. We want to make sure that you don't find yourself still here at 6 o'clock. To use our e-systems to sign in, you basically submit the 380 and 380 development agreements through our e-systems, and you've got a unique user ID. And if you need help logging in, you would just call the number that's there on the screen. After logging in, you enter your local government code. That is something that you'll use over and over again, and not just for this program. So make sure you have your local government ID available. 5 sections in the database. You can add an agreement, you can amend agreement, renew an agreement, replace an agreement, and view uploaded agreements through the portal for the cities and counties.
Hey, Russell, we have a question for you.
What's the next
question? This is from Jacob Serrano.
Mm-hmm.
I asked this earlier, but meant to ask Russell. When there are undocumented violations of labor or environmental laws by a company with an economic development agreement like Chapter 381, does the Comptroller Office have a role in determining the company's eligibility for the benefits of the agreement? I'm concerned about violations by the Colorado River Project documented in the press and by OSHA documents were requested from Travis County PBO about whether these would impact compliance status, and nothing substantive was provided. I was told this is because the compliance review is in progress.
Well, I'm familiar with the law, and I could not cite you the statute, but I believe there is a provision in even the economic development sales tax law that prohibits contracts with those that either employ undocumented or are undocumented company owners. I think that we probably should deal with this by sending us an email and having us look into it. But also there are several other laws that put certain restrictions on companies, everything from ones that prohibit companies that are local governments that do not by practice do business with anyone who's involved in the petroleum industry or has made an ordinance against contracting with anyone who has agreements with the government of Israel, and those are all enforced by the Attorney General's office. So I'd encourage you to get in touch with the Attorney General's office to bring up your concerns. But otherwise, send us an email. We can do a little bit deeper dive because I think this question is slightly off the topic, but I understand why you'd be asking it at this point because this is the appropriate point in this presentation. But unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive answer, but we can help you resolve that offline. Shall we move forward? Okay. So this is what the database looks like when you go in. Put your local government access code and you select one of the radio buttons at the bottom there and hit submit. And this is it automatically assigns an agreement number to your agreement. You enter your local government address, name and title, and contact information for the officer representing local government, which in this case, usually it's the person filling it out, and a general email address for public open records requests. This is really important because if as we had the question earlier, if someone wants to let you know that something's missing or wants more details on it, the controller's office is not the place to look because everything that we have is on the system. So if they're going to want more information beyond what's on the system, they need to contact the local government. The name of the entity that entered into the agreement with the local government, the contact or agent name and their contact information, assume names of the entity. This helps get around that issue that I was talking about earlier about Dell maybe calling themselves, D Services or something like that, whether it's intentional to deceive the reader or if it's just simply they've got several subsidiaries that they're working with on a particular project. So in other words, any assumed names of the company to help the local government convey that to the public as to who the real entity that's benefiting from it. Then the business address, the effective date of the agreement, expiration date of agreement, if applicable. I really am troubled by agreements that have no end date, but we do not prohibit that. And from my understanding that typically for contract law, it's illegal to have contracts that don't have end dates, but these types of agreements, we have never found any statute that said that a city cannot agree indefinitely for something, and especially if it has a clause that says it can be ended at any time by either party due to the contract not being met. Terms of expiration, what causes it to end? So that's, it doesn't have a definitive date, but what would cause it to end might be the receipt of a total of $5 million. That could be an end, the end of the agreement. The sources of money used to fund, this would be things like property tax, sales tax. Sometimes it's bond money. So it just really depends on the entity. And focus and scope of the agreement, this gives them a paragraph to convey to the public without having to read the whole agreement. What does this mean? And then summary of the agreement. Basically, it's a caption.
Okay, Russell, we have a question from Chandra Smith. The question is, what recourse does a community have when the business entity does not fulfill the terms of the 381 agreement, but the county does not take enforcement action?
The citizens don't have any recourse of lawsuits. There's this there's this thought by the public quite often that that you can, as a taxpayer, you have right to cause your local government to do things that seem like they are right, but are completely in their discretion. The short answer to that is probably voice it to the local government first, and then second, start looking for new commissioners and new council members. But there's really no enforcement on it unless they're breaking the law. And there's no requirement there's no, elected officials can make mistakes. Elected officials can do certain things that may seem like they're not in the best interest of the public. You would hope it not be that the case. But if they're not stealing the money and the person who is the beneficiary of this just simply went bankrupt, you should have had terms in the contract that allowed you to go back and take possession of the building, take possession of the equipment, some personal guarantee of the company, or some personal guarantee of the individual. But Texas's homestead law really makes it hard to collect blood from a turnip. So it's make good agreements is probably the best answer to your question.